My name is Kemberlee Kaye, and this is the Legal Insurrection Podcast. And today is April 3rd, 2025. Really excited about our program today. We have Representative Brian Harris, who is a Texas state representative, and we're going to discuss briefly how Texas universities are sidestepping DEI oversight, the types of things that they're engaging in. If you have listened to our podcast regularly or even a little bit, you know that it's something that I'm very concerned about, very passionate about, is letting people know that just because you're in a red state, just because you're in a place that is largely Republican or conservative or whatever the case may be, does not mean that you're safe from these kinds of things. The research that we do at criticalrace.org certainly illustrates as much. We've talked about this extensively. And so I really look forward to hearing what Representative Harrison has to say on this particular issue, because I know he has a very different perspective of it from the governing side than we do from the research side. So enjoy. So we do have a lot of listeners outside of the state of Texas. And for those people, and just for context for some of the things that we'll discuss today, can you briefly explain to people what's happening in the legislature and how the Texan electorate is not necessarily the picture that we see happening on Capitol Hill in Austin? I think there's, I'm not sure many people are aware of that.
No, they're not happy to do it. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with you. And yeah, happy to explain. Look, I think every Texan has to understand this. I would not have believed it if people had told me what it was like before I got elected myself. And like I say this as somebody who got elected right on the heels of serving in the biggest swamp of them all, Washington, D.C. I had the very real privilege of serving in President Trump's first administration. I was his chief of staff at the biggest cabinet agency, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So very proud to have helped President Trump deliver many historic conservative victories for the American people during his first term. And as soon as I moved back, my wife and I to our old farmhouse in Ellis County. Within just a few months, there was an open seat in the Texas legislature, which I ran for that in a special election and won. And I was so excited to lock arms with all these other elected Republicans in Texas, because I assumed every Texas elected Republican was fighting as hard for freedom and liberty as those of us who had been working in the Trump administration. And well, let's just say I was a little surprised when I showed up down here and realized that Democrats, yes, I'm saying this, Democrats actually control the Texas House of Representatives. And I'm sure your viewers or your listeners are going, how can that be? Isn't Texas an all Republican state? Well, it is. The voters of the state of Texas, who are generally conservative and Republican, they did their job. They went to the ballot box. They pushed the button to elect Republicans, and we've got Republicans in the governor's mansion, lieutenant governor's office, every statewide elected official, and massive majorities in the Texas House and the Texas Senate. The problem is what happened after that. What did those elected Republicans do with the power that voters gave them? In the Texas House, we've got a 26-seat majority. There are 26 more Republicans than Democrats, so we should run the chamber, right? Wrong. About 30-something liberal sellout rhinos cut a deal with 50 Democrats in the Democrat caucus to take over the House. So what that means is 50 Democrats selected one Republican and voted as a block for that Republican to be the Speaker of the House, giving them de facto control, the Democrat caucus, even though nominally our leadership is a guy with the word Republican by his name. And so what that means is the government's going to get bigger, spending is going to increase, taxes are going to go up, and my constituents and millions of Texans are going to continue having their money spent on Democrat priorities and weaponized against them and against their values and their children by funding things like DEI in our public schools and our public universities and our state agencies. The state of Texas is spending a ton of money to promote an ultra-liberal agenda, including to promote and fund the transgender ideology in our public universities. This kind of insanity has got to stop. So I'm not going to play the game down here. I'm calling foul, and I'm kind of on a mission to lead the rebellion against the corrupt leadership. I made a motion to vacate the chair from our liberal speaker just a couple days ago. And I'm trying to bring in an unprecedented level of transparency, because I believe if Texas voters knew what was up to, what was the betrayal that the Republicans they sent to Austin to work for them, if they knew about that, I think there would be, proverbially speaking, I think there'd be riots in the streets. So Texans have got to understand the betrayal that their own Republican representatives are perpetrating on the state of Texas.
Yes, and thank you so much for explaining that so well. It's just so frustrating to watch from where I sit. And I mean, you know, I've lived all over the country. I've traveled all over the world. There's different brands of Republican, and the Republicans in Texas, by and large, are the reddest of the red that you will find anywhere in the country. And unfortunately, that's just not what we see reflected in Austin, and it's just so frustrating. It's so frustrating.
Well, let me say a sentence or two about that, because it's beyond frustrating. It's infuriating. It's maddening. I would argue it's the biggest form of voter fraud, because the voters voted for Republican leadership. They reelected President Trump by 14 points, but the Biden-Harris team is controlling half of the Texas legislature. And just maybe in one sentence to summarize at the high level what's happening, because you talked about how red Texas voters are, and you're right, but their government's not. And so the disconnect is, look, Texas has a reputation, a national reputation. Hell, we have a worldwide reputation for leading in small government, liberty, and freedom. But for too many years, we have just been coasting on that reputation. And it's about time we start living up to it, and that's what I'm fighting for.
100%. I completely agree. And I'm so grateful that there are people like you, because I know there's just a very small contingent of people who are being very vocal about this. Of course, as you said, you're leading the charge, and I'm so grateful that at least there is someone, and that someone is you right now, handling that. One of the things that you mentioned,
I wish there were more, but we got to do what we can with what we've got.
I know, right? It would make life a lot easier, and we probably wouldn't be in this situation if we were more. But that's right. But yes, so appreciate everything you're doing there and how vocal you're being, at least to communicate to people outside of the situation what's happening. One of the things that you touched on, and it's really something that we cover extensively at Legal Insurrection, both with the Equal Protection Project, where we take legal action against discriminatory programs, and with criticalrace.org, where for 4 years we have tracked DEI and CRT activities in higher education on college campuses. And what's been really interesting is that now we have a historical record, and we can track how things are changing because we archive everything. And so, you know, we're kind of transitioning into looking at how the language is changing, how universities are sidestepping some of the regulations, whether it's executive orders coming down from President Trump, whether it's things happening in the state. One of the things I really want to impress upon people, in the same way that you explained, that even though Texas has a reputation for being such a small government, liberty-minded state, our universities don't necessarily reflect that. We did a report last year. I thought it would be really fun prior to the SEC championship to look at SEC schools and see what was happening in the DEI world on those campuses. And of course, we found just they're rife and with this nonsense. And then we put together a report about this, and no one believed us. No one believed us, and no one would cover the report. But that's really part of what I want to communicate, is that this stuff, no state is safe from this. I don't care how red it is. The craziest stuff over the years that we have seen always comes out of small towns, someplace that you would think would be safe.
Yep.
And so can we discuss, just at least in terms of the schools in Texas, how the legislator has handled DEI in higher education so far, and any actions that the state of Texas?
No, it's and just real quick, one example to your point about like in the red areas, the rural area. I represent a largely rural district in Texas. Now it's growing very fast, but it's historically been a very rural district. And one of my more rural cities called Red Oak, Texas, and something that made national headlines, international headlines, as we speak right now. British media is covering that. I'm getting media inquiries from all over the world because myself and Libs of TikTok sort of exposed that one of my public school teachers in small town, rural Red Oak, Texas, was a transgender, a male who is transitioning supposedly to a woman and is teaching 14-year-olds in Red Oak, and took to social media and broadcast a video of himself, dressed as a woman, just talking about how excited he was that he got, not making this up, his gender euphoria from the affirmation that his 14-year-old students were giving him. So I immediately demanded he be terminated, as did Libs of TikTok, and within a few days he was removed, which is good. But that story is breaking right now. But I say all that to say, there is nowhere, forget nowhere in Texas, there's nowhere in America safe from the woke mind virus, as Elon calls it, or the leftist propaganda and agenda. And I'll go further and say, we'll get to some specifics in a second, but it's almost harder in red states and in rural areas that are heavily known to be Republican, because people don't want to believe that a conservative, so-called, supposedly conservative government state like Texas could be possibly, and this is what my contention, the largest funder of DEI in America, or that the Texas government could be spending millions and millions and millions of tax dollars to promote the transgender agenda. And I'm telling you, as a matter of fact, as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, those two things are happening. I went to the University of Texas, which is just down the street here from the Capitol, and because there was the government of Texas was hosting a transgender conference. So I was like, you know what? I got a couple minutes. I'm going to run over there and check this out. So I literally snuck in. I walked in with the catering staff, and I could not believe what was being done with my constituents' hard-earned money. And I documented my journey over there. I put it on social media. We'll send it to you. Quickly got over 4 million views, because people across the country and world were horrified to see how much money the state of Texas was spending to promote the transgender agenda. And then on DEI, I will tell you just one of our state agencies. DEI is a cancer that has metastasized to every organ of the government of the great state of Texas. And I had, when all of our state agencies come before me, I asked them, are you doing any DEI? And the reports are, oh, no, Mr. Representative, I'm not doing any of that. But then I will hold up their own strategic plan or their own budget request where they're begging us to give them millions of dollars to do DEI. And I had one state agency, you're going to love this, to be very specific, the Texas Department of Transportation. Okay, these are the bureaucrats that build our roads and our bridges. They have an entire civil rights office, which has 50 FTEs. And I asked the head of the whole TxDOT, Department of Transportation, what is this for? Oh, we're just ensuring, compliance with laws and stuff. I go, oh, interesting, because I'm reading your budget request that you wrote. And all that it says, the entirety of your budget request, says that this office exists to promote DEI inside and outside of the agency. And he was speechless. He had to pretend, that he had nothing to say. And then I said, okay, let me talk to you about your contracts. Do you award contracts on the basis of race or gender? Some word salad answer. And I said, okay, you are doing it. How much money are you spending? How many contracts? What's the dollar value of the contract you've awarded, at least in part, on the basis of DEI, race, gender, ethnicity, something else? His answer, over $1 billion, over $1 billion, that just one agency, that's the amount of contracts that just one of our agencies has awarded using DEI type criteria to award the contracts. Texas A&M University, don't take my word for this, go watch the video, I posted it online. The current president of my alma mater, Texas A&M, Gig'em, was bragging to his faculty that they were in fact doing targeted recruiting. And then he wrote me a letter when I called him out on this. He said he can do targeted recruiting because the legislature hasn't yet stopped him. Out of his own words, basically admitting to doing things that I think are facially unconstitutional. They're violating the equal protections of the U.S. Constitution and violating Titles 6 and 7 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This is happening at every level of government in the state of Texas. We are spending billions of dollars on DEI and liberal gender ideology in the state of Texas. And I promise you, if you're listening in another state, if this is happening in the state of Texas, which is 100% Republican run, I promise this is happening in your state. And if you're a taxpayer in that state, I promise you, you are paying for it. You're being forced by your government to pay for it, as is the case here, where 30 million Texans are being forced to fund a radical leftist, socialist, Marxist ideological agenda. And I have had it. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to fight this next week. Any state agency engaged in DEI or promoting liberal gender ideology, I'm going to propose and file legislation to completely strip them of any state money. Because if you're engaged in that, you don't deserve one more penny from my constituents.
I completely agree. And I think people will be blown away just in hearing what you've just described. And I mean, it's something, of course, we see all the time, but this is what I do all day, every day. We're looking at cases of DEI. We're looking at cases of discrimination. We're watching all of these things permeate every every level of society, every level of culture, and trying to uproot it. I mean, I really appreciate the strides that the administration has taken out the gate, but you can't executive order this away. You just can't.
Well, and let me say one word about that, because you're right. You can't executive order it away entirely. Although, while I'm conflicted, on the one hand, I am so excited to see what President Trump and many of my friends who are back there again working with him in the second term, they're accomplishing on the DEI front in particular. I mean, President Trump has done more in 6 weeks to get rid of taxpayer-funded DEI, including taxpayer-funded DEI in the state of Texas, because the federal grants were funding a lot of this at our Texas universities. President Trump has done more to get rid of taxpayer-funded DEI in Texas than the all-Republican Texas legislature has in the past 10 or 20 years. In fact, DEI is explicitly allowed to occur under state statutes. DEI is mandated in countless parts of the Texas State Code. I'll tell you one thing that's going to shock you if you do this all the time. I'd love for you guys to look into this. The comptroller, I've only recently learned this, the comptroller of the state of Texas, okay, literally establishes minimum DEI thresholds that every state agency must use in every state agency contract that they award. So if it's certain types of construction contracts, it's got to be at least 20% DEI criteria. If it's some other type of contracting, there's one threshold that's as high as, I think, 33% of all of that category of contracts that are led by every one of our state agencies is supposed to use race, gender, or ethnicity as some type of a criteria. It is an outrage. And I'm telling you, the voters of the state of Texas are being betrayed. They did not vote for this, but they're all Republican. The Austin Uniparty, as I call it, the all Republican Austin Uniparty is forcing that to happen and forcing them to pay for it, which is just the worst piece of it all.
No, and I completely believe that. In a past life, I worked in immigration law prior to getting involved in anything political. And I did a stint actually at Texas A&M years after I graduated. I went back and worked in their international student office and was issuing all kinds of things, just helping with international students and scholars and researchers. And even then, and this was, 15 years ago, maybe a couple more than that, maybe 18. Anyway, it's been a while. They were talking about demographics that they were wanting to encourage to apply. And not just that, they wanted the demographics of the university to mirror the demographics of the state. And if you know anything about the state of Texas, and if you know anything about Texas A&M, that's just not going to happen. It's just not. And it didn't matter who was applying or the merit on which they were applying. It was purely based on race. And this, we know this. We've watched affirmative action play out. DEI is just a much, I think, a more hardcore version of that, packaged to where it's a little bit more palatable. And the left is tremendously good about doing that too. If a phrase or terminology falls out of favor, then they rebrand and shift.
Rebranding.
Yep. And we covered this too. And this is what we've seen in the DEI movement across higher education, is they're just rebranding and they're reshuffling people around. They're reshuffling resources around. One of the more pernicious things that they're doing is we've seen them move the DEI departments into the accessibility offices. So
yes,
they're
because this is their new. They already. I think they're just quickly. I want to get your thoughts on this. I want you to finish, but they're clearly, to your point on rebranding. They're realizing they're starting to lose the battle even on DEI. So now they're just pretending that all DEI is disability programs.
Yes, which is just so terrible. So you have people with legitimate disability needs,
correct,
and you're treating DEI,
they're going to harm the truly disabled.
Yes, as someone who can't walk, or can't
correct.
hear,
Yes.
or can't see.
Yep.
And it's just so, but they know it'll be protected there, at least until we get some good legal tests. And that's part of where we come in too. So, but it's incredibly frustrating. So one of the things that we really focus on too, we like to illuminate areas where we have major problems as a country on, all of these levels, but we also like to talk about solutions. So let's start first with the Texas legislator. Is there anything slated? Are there bills in committee, either in the Senate or the House, that look to address this currently?
So let me just be super blunt. Nobody should hold out a lot of hope for this session because, again, the Democrats control at least half of the legislative branch, the Texas House, which is the body that I serve in. So what you will probably see is a lot of fake bills, bills that purport to end DEI or bills that purport to end the taxpayer-funded gender indoctrination. But quite frankly, they're only doing that, by the way, because of the absolute hell that I'm raising, in the media and across the state and country to raise awareness. So now I'm letting, people in Texas and people across the country with the help of groups like yours, educate folks that, holy cow, wait, the state of Texas is funding DEI? Okay, so now they realize, all right, guys, we got to do something. But what they mean by that is we got to pretend to do something, okay? Because they're not going to stop it. So leadership in the House has filed a bill that purports, and they're calling it their ban on DEI. I have rebranded it. I call the House Leadership Bill the DEI Protection Act because what it does, and it's just so typical of these swamps. And as a side note, there's not just one swamp in America in D.C. There are 51 swamps. Okay, every state has its own swamp. So what the swamp is going to do down here, because they love DEI, what they're going to do. The first 4 pages of the bill to ban DEI look great. It bans DEI. Get rid of this in the classroom. Get rid of it from curricula. Wonderful. Sounds great. By the time you get to page 5, though, you're a lawyer, you've read this stuff, then starts the exemptions. And so basically they have these exemptions. I'm not making this up. It gets rid of DEI unless it's in a DEI program. Or it gets rid of like gender and queer studies unless it's part of a gender and queer studies program that is clearly known to be a gender and queer studies program. So they're literally going to, while they're pretending to get rid of DEI and LGBTQ programs, they're going to codify the taxpayer expense of it into statute. That is the kind of games that I'm fighting against down here right now. So I filed my own bills to actually get rid of it. I mean, I filed several versions of this. One, just to defund any public institution that's engaging in DEI or gender ideology. I've got another bill that takes all the exemptions out of our current, because supposedly we banned DEI 2 years ago. I mean, I voted for that bill because it was better than nothing, but the exemptions literally carve out, I'm not making this up, in the bill to ban DEI in college, there is an exemption to explicitly allow DEI in all college curriculums, programs, and classes. So I've got bills to end all that there as well. And, so because we got to use the power of the purse, but the problem is our legislature wants to fund it. They just don't want to say it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we see that all the time in the money. Yep. I mean, that's something that we have advised repeatedly, cut the money, and then this will dry up because there won't be.
But they don't want to do it because the leadership of these universities, they're offering, remember, hey, you know what? We got sweet tickets to the, you can come sit in the chancellor's suite at the big game. And it takes very little to get otherwise good lawmakers to vote the wrong way. And it's sad. It's sad.
It is. It's sad but true, but people are unfortunately corruptible, most of us anyway.
Yep.
And so, but no, I appreciate the work you're doing. Last question for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that regular Texans can do if they're watching this and they're going, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We can't count on the legislator. The governor in Texas, for those of y'all who are not aware, is a very weak governorship. Think what you will about Abbott, but his ability to do much is pretty limited by design in the Texas Constitution. Feel free to correct me if that's not correct. But what can Texans
do? That's how the Constitution reads, yeah.
Yes. Yes, and I think if I remember correctly.
So what they can do? What can they do? It's a great question. And at the risk of sounding self-serving, I'm sincere when I say this. That's not. One of the reasons that after having served for many years and fought the swamp in D.C. and now I'm battling the swamp in Austin, the reason actually I believe the swamp in Austin is worse. And the reason I say that is because pretty much everybody down here is a Republican, because in most of Texas, you can't run as a Democrat and get elected. So what we have is people who are actually Democrats who run as Republicans. So down here, like you have, everyone looks like they're on the same team, but they're not. And then number two, the reason that the Austin swamp I think may be worse than D.C. is because there's almost no media attention. People, my constituents, and it's rational. They're living their lives. They're raising their kids. They're working their jobs. They're trying to do their civic duty. They try their best, so they try to pay attention. But what that means is they triage their attention. So it's, okay, I got to pay attention to government. What that usually means, okay, what's the president doing? Or maybe what's happening in Washington, D.C., and it's really hard to focus on Austin at the state level. And so as a result, there's almost no media down here. And there's even less conservative media. I mean, almost none, like almost zero conservative media in Austin. So the one thing they can do is follow me on Twitter, because when I got in, or I guess it's X now, when I got in, members were not speaking out on platforms like I am now, and saying, I'm not going to play by the unwritten rules of the Austin Swamp, which is you never ever criticize publicly what we do down here behind closed doors. And I said, guys, I got 4 kids under 10. I'm not going to play by these rules. You've got Democrats chairing. It was almost 40% of our committees. I mean, imagine if Nancy Pelosi was a committee chair, or AOC was a committee chair. That's literally been the case in the Texas House since I got here. So I started going online and said, if nobody else will tell the story, I will. So I'm on X at Brian E. Harrison. At Brian E. Harrison on X. I post numerous times a day to educate, because education and transparency is number one. I always say that transparency is like kryptonite in the swamp, and that's why they really hate me speaking out. But then number two, if you do live in Texas, find out who represents you. Who's your state representative? Who's your state senator? And call them and ask them a very specific question. What are you doing to stand up to the corrupt leadership in the Texas House that has allowed the Democrat caucus to control the chamber? Ask them that specifically. Ask them that in email, on Facebook. Ask them that publicly. Tag them on X. Ask the question, what have you done to stand up to the corruption? And then if there's a secondary question, what have you done to restore Texas exceptionalism, to fight back against DEI transgender ideology, and to shrink the size and the cost of government? Are you fighting against visibly? Like, is there anything you can point to that says, you want to stop public funding of universities and agencies that are engaged in DEI? And ask them for a specific example, and do it in a public forum, because until we start holding elected Republicans' feet to the fire, if you're in a red state, it's all Republicans. Until voters start holding their elected Republican officials' feet to the fire, I fear that things will never change. And that's why I'm doing everything I can. And so happy and grateful to be with you here today and your organization to help educate people in Texas and across the country on what I firmly believe is betrayal and voter fraud that's happening, being perpetuated by elected Republicans.
No, I completely agree. And I thank you so much for your time today. Any final parting thoughts before?
No, I just, as Texans here, my goal here, I want Texas to be the #1 state in America for freedom and liberty. I want us to live up to our small government reputation. And at the end of the day, I really just want government to be as irrelevant to our lives as possible, so we can be as free as God meant for us to be. And I just really appreciate y'all inviting me on here this afternoon.
Yes, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for being such a loud voice in all of this. I know that draws a lot of attention, good and bad. So
I've noticed that.
Yeah. So, but we appreciate all that you're doing and everything you're doing for the state of Texas, and also for the issue at large. Because this is not something limited to Texas, obviously. No. But we thank you for your time, and keep up the good work.
Same to y'all. Thank you. God bless y'all. God bless Texas. See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You bet. Bye-bye.